Live from London, this is BBC News. Ukraine's President Zelensky is visiting Berlin as Germany pledges its largest weapons package for Kyiv. The most powerful cyclone to affect the Bay of Bengal for more than 10 years makes landfall, bringing record levels of flooding. Turkey's leaders cast their votes along with the people in one of the most pivotal elections in the country's modern history.
You have won the Eurovision Song Contest 2023!
The Swedish act Loreen wins the Eurovision Song Contest, becoming the first woman to triumph twice. Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Nancy Kachungira. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said that his country will continue to support Ukraine in its war against Russia for as long as needed. He was speaking after meeting the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Berlin. Let's hear a bit now of what he had said.
This awful war has severe geopolitical consequences for everyone, but mostly for the men and women of Ukraine. More than 1 million of them, women, children and older people, have found protection here in Germany. Our citizens here stand in full solidarity to the people who have fled from the brutal attacks.
Well, for his part, Mr. Zelensky described Germany as a true friend and reliable ally, and he thanked the German government for what he called its fantastic solidarity. On Saturday, Berlin announced that it would supply weapons worth around $3 billion to Kyiv. Earlier, Mr. Zelensky was received by President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. The trip comes just a day after a visit to Italy, where he met the Italian Prime Minister, the President and the Pope. Let's cross to our correspondent now, Jenny Hill in Berlin. Jenny, this seems like almost a resetting of relationships between Germany and Ukraine. They've not always seen eye to eye when it comes to how to address the war, but this seems like a real turning point here.
I'm not sure that I would put it that strongly, because I think what you've seen in Germany is a very gradual shift over the last year or so. If we'd had this conversation back then, just as the war began, it would have been unthinkable that a country like Germany would be sending weapons into an active conflict zone. Here we are today, and Germany's just announced that huge package of weapons, 2.7 billion euros worth. To give you a sense of scale, that effectively will double its contributions militarily so far to Kyiv. There were initially, you're quite right, I think concerns particularly amongst the Ukrainians about the German position. First of all, its hesitation over sending weapons. Most of that hesitation grounded in this country's history. Post-Second World War, Germany saw itself as having a special responsibility to maintain peace on the continent diplomatically rather than militarily. But also, I think, because Olaf Scholz is a social democrat, he heads up a coalition government here. There were a lot in his own party of people who could be described as, if not pro-Russian, certainly having sympathies with Russia. Now that has also changed. It changed actually pretty quickly after that full-scale invasion, but there were concerns about Olaf Scholz's government and its positioning when it came to loyalties to Ukraine. I think that has long gone. I think that Ukraine has been fairly satisfied for some time, actually, that Germany has been a good supporter. It is the second largest donor of military and financial aid, second to the US. And I think that this trip, though, was one of those occasions where not only was Ukraine, President Zelensky, able to elicit an ongoing commitment of support from one of its major allies, of course, Italy yesterday too. But also this was a chance for both parties, both Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, and President Zelensky, to send a message to Vladimir Putin that, despite the fact that this war is dragging on, costing lives, costing money, and not just in Ukraine, that they will stand resolute. We heard Olaf Scholz saying, we will support Ukraine for as long as it's necessary.
And there is a lot of concern about how long that will be, isn't there, Jenny? I mean, Ukraine does have this looming counteroffensive coming up, and the sort of aid that Germany is giving, this $3 billion of support, that's going to become increasingly important.
Yes, interestingly, we heard President Zelensky in a press conference here in the last hour or so saying that he hoped the war could end this year. It is, of course, just a hope. He has a peace plan. Germany has said that it will support Ukraine in whatever it wants to do, frankly, in terms of ending that war. But it wants Ukraine to take the lead when it comes to deciding the terms upon which it would end the war. And of course, as we know, Ukraine is absolutely adamant that its territory, its territorial integrity must remain intact. In terms of the military support, though, this is one that we're going to have to watch because, as I've said, Germany had been rather hesitant about sending weapons at all. Then it hesitated about sending battle tanks, which Ukraine had requested. Now it is sending those tanks and a whole lot more, air defences too. President Zelensky made it very clear again today that what he really wants are modern Western fighter jets. Germany does not want to give those at this stage. It's one of the NATO countries which is very reluctant to do so for all sorts of reasons, but one of them is that it does not want to supply weapons which couldn't be deemed essentially as defensive. We heard that from Olaf Scholz. President Zelensky, I think, is rather undeterred. He's going to hold talks with a Security Council here this afternoon, and he's going to try to persuade them, he said earlier, to join a so-called alliance of countries which will supply modern fighter jets to Ukraine.
All right, we'll leave it there, but thank you very much, Jenny. Jenny Hill reporting from Berlin. The Eurovision Song Contest 2023 has a winner. Sweden's act Loreen obtained 583 points with that pop anthem Tattoo. It was the favourite going into the competition, and she's only the second person to win it twice. Her first victory on the popular contest was more than a decade ago. Yes, she won the competition in 2012 with that song, Euphoria. The UK's entry, Mae Muller, came second from last in the final standings, but said that she would never forget this journey. Well, last night's Eurovision was watched by an estimated global TV audience of 180 million. Many also packed into the open-air fan zone on Liverpool's waterfront to watch the long-awaited final. Earlier, I spoke to our reporter, Luxmi Gopal, who was watching the fan village in Liverpool being taken down.
The Eurovision fan village behind me is being dismantled. All the glitter is being swept away at the end of a fantastic Eurovision week and build-up here. Yesterday, the fan village was full of around 15,000 people because it was a ticketed event to see the Eurovision final screened on the big screen here. But all this week, there have been performances, live music, DJ sets, everything to do with Eurovision and music taking place here in the fan village behind me. And all throughout the week, several tens of thousands of people have come here. But of course, it was all about last night, the big night, the Eurovision final. And the opening act, last year's winners, Ukraine, the Kalush Orchestra, they had a bit of a surprise appearance with Princess Catherine playing the piano as part of it. There were some real fan favourites, as there have been all throughout the week, that really got the fan village roaring and erupting, and that was Finland with Cha Cha Cha. They didn't quite, as you probably remember if you saw it last night, they were a second place to Loreen, the winning act. As you mentioned, the UK came in second from last, the UK hosting on behalf of Ukraine. But even though it was a bad night for the UK, overall it's been considered a really good week, with lots of fans I've spoken to praising how Liverpool has hosted the event. I spoke to lots of regular Eurovision goers who said this was actually the best experience they've had of Eurovision being hosted and the build-up to it. I spoke to lots of people working and living in the city who, even if they weren't Eurovision fans, said that the sense of excitement and the energy that's been around the city all this week has been like nothing they've experienced before, and they've been really proud of how this event has showcased the city. And I've also been speaking to Ukrainian refugees who moved here in the past year, and they talked to me about how emotional it made them to see how much Liverpool did justice to showcasing Ukraine and hosting on behalf of Ukraine. And hotels have been full, bars and restaurants have been busy, and Liverpool City Council has put a forecast of around £25 million being brought into the local economy with all the tourists and the visitors. That's not a final figure, that's just a forecast. But of course it's about so much more than just the financial benefit, because Eurovision is so much more than simply a song contest. It's a statement, isn't it? A statement of togetherness, and it's judged that Liverpool has done that really well. And next year it's Sweden's turn to take on that role, just in time for the 50th anniversary of ABBA winning Eurovision.
Lakshmi Gopal reporting there from Liverpool. Let's go back to Ukraine. In the past hour, we've received the first pictures purporting to show damage from last night's airstrikes on the western Ukrainian city of Ternopil. This video from Ukraine's state emergency services claims to show the aftermath of the Russian missile strikes on a warehouse in Ternopil. The Kremlin says that they were targeting Western arms depots and Ukrainian troops. The strikes happened just moments before Ukraine's Eurovision contestants took the stage in Liverpool, and Ternopil is the hometown of Tvorchi, the electronic duo that came sixth in last night's competition. In one of the most pivotal elections in its modern history, Turkey is voting on presidential and parliamentary elections. Both main candidates have cast their vote. This is current President Recep Tayyip Erdogan voting in Istanbul. He's been in power for 20 years. And this is his rival, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. He is the leader of a broad opposition alliance. Well, our Middle East correspondent Anna Foster is in Antakya. She's been visiting a hub where thousands of people were arriving in buses to cast their votes. I spoke to her a little earlier.
This is one of the places that they come to next when they get off the buses, and here in Turkey people vote in schools. This one that you can see is so badly damaged that it's not even safe to go back inside. So instead you have this whole row of containers, one for every classroom that would have normally been where people were going in and casting their votes. And there have been long queues here all day, a really steady stream of people who've been coming back to this earthquake area to cast their votes, because if they didn't register in the parts of Turkey that they're in now, they had to come back here in order to cast their vote in what you rightly say is one of the most pivotal elections here in years. So over the last few days, I've been really trying to get a sense of the issues, the things that are going to be on people's minds when they cast their vote. The earthquake is one of them. The economy, of course, is another big one. Here's what some voters had to say when I talked to them in the city of Adana.
İyi şeyler olmasını temenni ediyoruz. İnşallah olacak.
I hope good things will happen, and God willing, it will be good. We expect CHP to win. There's no tolerance for any sort of criticism right now. We're going through troubled times. As I'm talking to you, I feel anxious because I could be arrested tomorrow, but it's all right. They can't scare us with prison sentences.
İstikrardan yanayız.
I'm voting for consistency, stability, but I'll respect whoever the society chooses. I'm all for democracy and its principles. I will respect whoever wins.
I think the earthquake will affect the outcome of the election seriously because people feel resentful of the government. Many of us share this feeling in Adana. We think if another earthquake hits here, there won't be anyone trying to rescue us. This grim concern caused a sharp shift in votes.
That was the thoughts of some voters in Adana. Worth saying as well, the first man that you heard there, the student, when he was talking about being arrested, actually it's really difficult to find people who are willing to talk on camera, some of them about the issues, but many of them about the way that they're planning to vote. It makes them really nervous because freedom of speech has been one of the issues here in Turkey over the last few years as well. So the economy, the earthquake, all of these things have made this a really tight competition. President Erdogan has been in power for 20 years. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the challenger, represents really a whole group of opposition parties who've come together in an unprecedented way. They have different visions for the future of Turkey, different things that they want to do after the election, but one thing that brought them together behind a single candidate was their wish wish to try and unseat President Erdogan after 2 decades in charge.
Anna Foster reporting there. A powerful cyclone has crashed into coastal areas of Bangladesh and northern Myanmar with wind speeds of over 200 kilometers per hour. In Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, at least 250,000 people have been forced to take shelter. Particular fears have been expressed for the nearly 1 million Rohingya refugees living in flimsy camps in the region. Our correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan sent this report from Cox's Bazar just before the cyclone made landfall.
Bangladesh's tourist police, and they're patrolling the beach here in Cox's Bazar in the southeast of the country to move tourists away from this beach. You can see that the waves are starting to become more intense and the rain is already coming down here ahead of Cyclone Mocha. And there are still quite a lot of people out and about, which is why they want people to clear off the beach, and will be going soon as well. Now, authorities here have been issuing announcements telling people to be in their homes if they're secure or move to an emergency shelter. And we were at one shelter yesterday, which is a school. We saw hundreds of families all crammed in to the classrooms there. Some had even brought their cattle and their chickens, their livestock with them as well to see this storm out. Now, this part of the world is no stranger to cyclones, and this is actually the start of the annual monsoon season. But forecasters fear that Cyclone Mocha could be one of the worst they've seen in well over a decade. There's also huge concern about close to 1 million Rohingya refugees who stay over an hour from where we are right now in the world's largest refugee camp, because those Rohingya refugees live in very flimsy bamboo structures with tarpaulin roofs. They have very little protection. Now, the authorities in Bangladesh don't allow the refugees to leave the camps, so they're staying there through this storm, and there's huge concern, even though humanitarian agencies say that they've moved some of the refugees within the shelters to places they feel might be a little bit safer. So we're going to get off this beach now, along with all the others, as the weather gets worse in anticipation of Cyclone Mocha.
That's Rajini Vaidyanathan reporting. Earlier, the United Nations Refugee Agency representative in Bangladesh, Johannes van der Klauw, told us about the preparations to mitigate the effects of Cyclone Mocha.
We have been working around the clock the last days to be prepared for this landfall of the cyclone today, which might be one of the most severe we've seen in the last decade. So we need to be prepared for the worst. Insofar we can be prepared, because if we look at the refugee population in the camps in Cox's Bazar, they live in very, very flimsy bamboo shelters, which cannot withstand a storm of this magnitude. But coming back to the preparations we have put in place, first of all, we started with thousands of refugee volunteers to make the population aware that this is coming. So they have been sending messages to all the tens of thousands of refugees to be prepared, in the sense that when this comes, they need to seek shelter at higher level areas. They need to tie down the shelter. They got ropes for all this. And they have organized simulations how to evacuate from areas in the camp which are very prone to the floodings and to the storms, because the cyclone comes with heavy and intense rainfall, which leads not only to flooding but also to landslides.
Johannes van der Klauw from the United Nations Refugee Agency. Let's bring you some of the day's other news now. The Democratic governor of the U.S. state of North Carolina has vetoed legislation that would have banned almost all abortions beyond the first trimester of pregnancy. The state's General Assembly will now need to attempt an override vote to force through the measure. The new chief executive of Twitter says she's excited to help transform the business. Linda Yaccarino's appointment was announced by Elon Musk on Friday. Posting on Twitter, she said she had long been inspired by his vision to create a brighter future. The BBC has learnt that Google's estimates of the climate impact of different forms of transport are inaccurate. The search engine's carbon calculator on its Google Flights app overestimates the impact of some high-speed train journeys, but underestimates that of flying. We'll turn to UK politics now, and there's lots to discuss. Rishi Sunak's pledges on the economy and migration, and the Labour manifesto proposal to give millions of EU citizens the right to vote if they return to power at the next general election. Earlier, I spoke to our political correspondent, Tony Bonsignore.
There was a conference yesterday of a new grassroots organisation within the Conservative Party. We've got another conference in the coming days, not dissimilar, and a debate going on about where the party goes from here and whether this is the right direction, as well as the leadership of Rishi Sunak. Now, yesterday we heard from some very senior Conservatives, very closely associated with Boris Johnson, calling for a change in direction, calling for things like lower taxes, maybe a harder line on Brexit, a closer relationship between grassroots Conservative Party members and the leadership and central office. Now, today we've had the first real response from that. Grant Shapps, who's the Energy Secretary, has been out doing the media round this morning. He was asked about that, and what he did was refer back to what has really been the central set of promises from Rishi Sunak since he became Prime Minister. 5 pledges that he made, which are halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing national debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping boats across the English Channel. And what Grant Shapps said in response to that criticism was the government remains focused on those pledges, even if they are proving tough to meet.
I accept that they are difficult and very detailed pledges. These are not vague numbers that we've put numbers to what we've promised. It's difficult. Secondly, I thought it was always going to be difficult, and we still are committed absolutely to those 5 pledges.
So you heard there from Grant Shapps. I think for the moment the government's saying, look, no change at all here, and I think partly that's a reflection of the fact that given everything that happened to the Conservatives last year, and of course we've had 3 Prime Ministers in less than a year, I think Rishi Sunak feels for the moment his leadership is on pretty safe ground.
And Tony, the other interesting thing we should talk about today, reports about Labour possibly extending the right to vote in the UK for EU citizens.
Yeah, now this story has been sparked today by this splash in the Sunday Telegraph, which suggests that Labour are considering giving 16 and 17-year-olds a vote. At the moment, the minimum age is 18, but also, and perhaps more controversially for some anyway, giving settled EU citizens in the UK, of which there are many, giving them the right to vote as well. At the moment, they can only vote, for example, in local or mayoral elections. Now, there's been lots of talk around this this morning on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg. It was the turn of Jonathan Reynolds, Labour's shadow business secretary, to be asked about this. He didn't confirm it, but neither did he deny it. This is what he had to say.
We do want to strengthen our democracy. We believe if people make a contribution to this country, if they live here, there's an argument for having them involved in that process. But we will set that out in detail. As I say, this is part of how we make policy. It's a democratic process involving the whole breadth of the Labour movement. But if people are making a contribution to the UK, let's celebrate that.
So you heard there from Jonathan Reynolds, not ruling it out, not confirming it, but it is clearly there is a discussion underway within Labour. But it'll be, I think, a very involved and very controversial decision if we were to get to that. And of course, that assumes that Labour are going to win the next election.
Our political correspondent Tony Bonsignore there. Pablo Picasso was one of the most famous and influential artists of the 20th century. Famous for his experimental style, he helped develop collage and cubism. But one of his earliest works has now come under intense scrutiny for a secret image hidden for more than a century. Tim Orman's got the story.
Picasso painted Le Moulin de la Galette when he was just 19 years old. At first glance, by his standards, it seems fairly conventional. But what's this? That dark shape at the bottom of the painting? Is it a chair? Perhaps a jacket? No. Turns out it was originally meant to be a dog.
What we know is that in many instances, Picasso painted aspects of the composition and then subsequently obliterated them and transformed them into other compositional elements. This was really part of his practice. If you look closely,
Experts long suspected there may have been something hidden away in the painting, but it was only when they used a new technique called X-ray fluorescence imaging spectroscopy that the earlier image was revealed. Why the playful and occasionally mercurial artist chose to alter the painting is unclear, but the presence of a dog in the foreground may well have changed the way a viewer might interact with the image.
One can only speculate why Picasso would have concealed this, but certainly now my eye is drawn to all these wonderful figures in the composition. So no longer is the dog there to kind of monopolize our view.
Le Moulin de la Galette has recently been fully restored, but the mysterious canine remains hidden away. It was apparently intended to be a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, which seems sort of appropriate round about now. Tim Allman, BBC News.
A fascinating discovery there. Well, do stay here with us on BBC News. I'm Nancy Kachingira. I'll have the headlines for you in just a short while. Do stay with us. Bye for now.